Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Mink. I'm the marketing manager for Interview Valet, and we are so excited to have you here. We're entering one of my favorite series of discussions that we do, and that is how coaches and consultants can grow their business with podcast guesting. Um, I like this topic because it's specific. It's talking to a certain audience and the unique problems that they have. And so I'm really excited to dive into that today. Let us know over in the chat where you're joining us from today. I'm coming from you for the actually sunny Pacific Northwest in Washington State. We actually have some sun today, so that's nice. And later on today's extra special because we have a couple guests joining us. We will have Hannah from our team talking. She is a client account manager, and she's going to be talking with one of our clients, our certified guest, Juliana. And so she can share directly her point of view, her perspective on how she has used podcast guesting to grow her business. So I'm really excited. If you don't have the copy of the report that is specific for this topic today, I'm going to put that over in the chat in a second, and you can get your free download there. So we have a lot to talk about. So let's get started. I'm going to bring on your presenter for today, our founder and CEO, Tom Schwab.
Tiffany, thank you so much.
Welcome. I'm excited. I love this series that we do. We kind of break down our primary demographics that we work with. So this month is coaches and consultants. Next month, to go ahead and tease that, we'll be talking directly to brands and those that have used podcast guesting to grow their brand. And then June will be nonfiction authors.
Yeah, and I think it works well for everyone, but especially for coaches and consultants, because it's a relationship sale, right? Before you hire somebody that's going to be that critical in your life or your business, you want to know their heart, right? It's not a transaction. It's a relationship, and people have to know you. That's that know, like, and trust. And I don't think today there's any way that you can get that know, like, and trust easier or at scale than on podcast interviews.
Exactly. And like you said, it's about a relationship. Your ideologies and your concepts kind of have to mesh, right? You can't be two polar opposites and bring a consultant in and you're just not on the same page, right? It's going to go south, either the relationship wise, or they're not going to be in line with your business and your goals and your values. So it's the relationship aspect is really important in building that connection.
You know, and we've been talking a lot about AI and Chat GPT and everything. And I think that has made the relationship side and audio even more powerful, right? Because now it's so easy to come up with, 100 blogs in the time it used to take you to write one. And so the blogs, the content out there is getting so generic. So do you really think somebody's going to read a generic blog and think, wow, I wonder if this came from a person or, AI, but because of that blog, this is the coach or this is the consultant that I'm going to hire? Probably not, right? Those are going to become so generic that it's going to have to be something else to set you apart. And really, they haven't gotten to the point yet where they can replace you and I talking here or you and I talking on a podcast. So that human element, I think that's what's going to get people to listen, to connect, and really to take action.
Exactly. I think audio is going to become so much more important because then that it's a genuine person talking to you, right? Like you said, it's hard to create and design a 45-minute interview with nothing, right? It can't be AI generated yet, hopefully, but it lets you know that real person is talking and their experience and what they bring to the table and how they can help their ideal clients in their business.
Definitely.
So I know we have a lot to cover. Are you ready to dive in? And
I am, and I want to make sure. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for Juliana, who's got an amazing story. And so we got some calls or some time for questions and answers at the end. So I've got
Yes.
some sort of a highlight of the report to go through, and then we can jump into the rest.
Perfect. Let's get started.
All right. So, not to do death by PowerPoint, I want to point out some big things here. My belief is that obscurity is your biggest problem, right? If you're a coach, if you're a consultant, what you offer today is perfect for some people, right? You may be on version 1.0 or 10.0. There are people right now on their knees at night praying for what you have to offer. But the problem is the reason they're not hiring you is because they don't know you exist. And often we'll say, well, you know, we buy the best. Well, the truth is we buy the best we know of, right? So if I don't know of you, I'm just probably going to buy the best of what's there. So that idea of how can we be less obscure? And I really think this idea of breaking through the noise has gotten to be laughable, right? Because more and more people are just like putting more stuff out on social media. Nobody's getting heard. Everybody's yelling louder. So the question is, how do you get heard, right? How do you break through that obscurity? And we're going to go through this here. Um, you know, there's a thing out there that says you should be everywhere. Love this picture, right? There's people that says you should be everywhere. Well, you should be everywhere your client should be. Well, if that's true, then I should be advertising above urinals and on park benches. But you know in your heart that you shouldn't be everywhere. You should be everywhere your clients are listening. You should be everywhere that they're making buying decisions. But at times, if you're in the wrong place, it can actually hurt you. And let me explain this. There was a client that came to us, and I said, well, why do you want to be on targeted podcast interviews? And I loved his answer. He said to me that he thought most of social media today, as he said, was the digital equivalent of advertising above urinals. And I stopped and I had laughing. I'm like, explain that one. And he said, well, I'm a high level consultant, right? He's like, if somebody saw me at the wrong place, it's not a reason to hire me. It's a reason not to hire me. Or to think that, oh, he's like low level. He doesn't charge much, right? The best restaurants in town, the best doctors in town, the best lawyers are not advertising on buses and they're not advertising on park benches. And think about it. If you want to level up, where you advertise, where you're seen says a lot about the value there too. And so, a lot of times in marketing, they'll say, well, we're one funnel away. Well, I'm really big in the idea of automation, but I believe you're one conversation away. And think about that in your life. Where have the best clients come from? The best partners, the best employees, right? Team members. Where have they come from? Did they all just come through a funnel? My guess is they probably came from a conversation. And the one I always think of is my bride, right? Karen did not come through a funnel, right? It wasn't the 7 billion people in the world and they came through a funnel. It came from a conversation. It came from an introduction. And that's why I think conversations are key to you not only being not obscure anymore, but key to you growing your business as a coach or a consultant. Because at the end of the day, podcasts are business development, right? There's the idea of people come to us and they're like, I want to get on podcasts. No, you don't, right? You want to grow your business. You want to grow your brand. Podcast guesting is business development. If it's not, it's a waste of time, right? And some people will say, well, it's just PR to get my message out there more, right? There's no line, right? In marketing, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And you'll see a lot of people that will go out just for a lot of appearances, right? And then they find out it's not, it's fun the first couple of times, but if it's not driving business, it's not fun anymore. It's like fishing. Fishing's a lot of fun. But if you go out there for a couple of times and you don't catch anything, it's not fun anymore. So if podcasting is business development, let's talk about how coaches and how consultants can use podcast guesting to grow their brand and grow their business, right? It's not about getting on another interview. It's about converting on every interview. And some of the conversion has to do where you are in the product interview life cycle. And this is a little bit geeky here. Bear with me as I go through this. Okay. We looked at where people get results with podcasts. And there's really 6 different levels in the cycle. And think about where you are, where other people are that you've heard. The beginning is the seed phase, right? You've got a new idea, you've got a new business, you've got a new website, you're testing out the market. That's where you're in the seed phase, right? There's a lot of work there, but you don't get a lot of return on it, right? So if you look at the y-axis here as the potential, right? But you've got to get that seed phase in. This could be talking about the new book, talking about the new course, getting some market research. Then you go to the launch phase, right? Where you know this works and you get out there for the exposure. And this is where you get lots of new clients, you get lots of new exposure, you get lots of other avenues picking you up, right? Exposure brings opportunity. And then you get about to the end of the launch stage and you notice, wow, there's a lot of people that are sort of copying what I am doing, right? If you stop right then, somebody else will come in and say, that was my idea. I took all of that. So you want to continue to dominate so you can own that market. But at a certain point, you've gotten all that you can out of there. It's starting to become saturated. You need to go back and start with a new idea to seed, launch, own. And you can see some people, we always only tell people you should only do podcast interview marketing in the first 3 phases, because we've seen other ones where they get into like the copy phase and they're like, oh yeah, we're just like so-and-so. Now, that's not interesting, right? Podcasters don't want you there for that. Podcast listeners are like, wow, that's like really old idea. And worse yet is when you get into the commodity and you say, well, we're just like that, but we're cheaper. Podcasters are looking for new ideas. They're looking for innovations. That's what the listeners are looking for. They're not just looking for, we've got, the model from 5 years ago and we've got it cheaper. And then I've seen this on podcasts before where you've seen somebody that maybe have been talking about the same thing for 10 years, right? Somebody out there on a podcast where it's gotten to be almost laughable, right? I want to talk about why you should start a blog. Very interesting topic in Y2K, not so much right now. So let's go through each one of these stages, right? The seed, launch, and own, and see how you can leverage podcast interviews to really grow your business. So like I said, the seed phase, you've got something new, but it's that pebbles before rocks. In the Navy, we used to call it fire for effect. Just don't go out there with everything. Make sure that you know things are working, that it's dialed in. And there's different ways you can do this. Sometimes it's market research. Craig Cody is an example I always use of this. Craig is a CPA. He's a fractional CFO. He's a tax advisor. And he came to us and he said, I want a new client in each of the 50 states, and I don't want any 2 in the same industry, right? Before 2008, he had most of his clients were in brick and mortar in Long Beach or in Long Island. So it was very, very constrained. So he says, I want to be diverse. Well, we started to get him out there on podcasts. And because we are a data-driven company and track all the data, he was on a podcast that was focused on dentists. It was like fish in a barrel, right? He did so well. So we went to him and he said, this podcast performed well. And he's like, oh yeah, I like dentists. They're recession proof. They're professionals. They've got good cash flow. And so based on that market research in that seed phase, we went into the launch phase and really focused just on dental podcasts. And a large portion of his practice has become dentists, right? He even had a dentalpreneur podcast for a while, talking about the business side of it. So trying to do that market research. Other people are trying to rebrand. Eddie Yoon, great mind around category design. He used to work for one of the big agencies. He wrote a book called Super Consumer, published by HBR. Well, he went off on his own to start his own agency. And guess what? The old agency didn't give him backlinks, right? They weren't moving on his traffic. So he had to go out there and get new exposure for his brand. Eddie would grow and get those backlinks. So it was a way for him to get out there and really do that foundational work as he started his new business. There's other people that are trying to expand into new markets. Risa Gooding, originally from the Caribbean, she now lives in Israel. She's one of the top inbound marketing consultants, right? Israel is a great market, but it's a small market. And she realized she wanted to get back into the US market. So instead of flying back here, podcasts were a great way to do that. And it really was helpful because now with the currency fluctuation, right? The US dollar is so much stronger. So we're seeing people that are overseas, in Europe or Australia, trying to market to clients and customers in the US because they'd rather get paid in the strong dollar than the weaker local currency. So these are all things that could be done in that seed phase. And, before we work with anybody, we go through this entire discovery call of trying to figure out where they are, what they're trying to do, because we understand it's not about a podcast interview. It's about your goals, right? Of growing your business, of growing your brand. Another one is in the seed phase is starting a different idea, right? Everybody was talking about flipping houses. Well, Mark Podolsky, the land geek, was talking about flipping land. And it's an idea that hadn't been out there. So when he first started to put it out there on the podcast, it was something new to think about. And he actually had his own podcast, and it was a great thing for people to think, hey, that idea is interesting, and then come back to his podcast to learn more. He grew his entire business really through podcasting. So let's go to the next stage, launch. Launch is when you're like, oh, this works, right? Maybe you've got a new book that's coming out. Maybe you've got a program where it's like, oh yeah, this is perfect. I've spent years and way too much money building this platform. Now it's time to launch and to get out there. And as you can see, that y-axis, this launch side, if you've got that foundation, is a great place to really get the most results from it. So let's look at a couple examples. Kim Daly is one, right? Kim Daly is one of the top franchise consultants, franchise coaches there. She had built all of that infrastructure there, and she was ready to go out and talk to the market. Got on a lot of podcasts. Typically, we don't advise people to do more than one a week, right? More is not better. Better is better. So she was getting out there and getting on great podcasts. She was doing the content to repurpose. She was everywhere. She's like this omnipresent, and it really grew her business on that. Another one is like a book launch. Chandler Bolt recently relaunched his book, and Chandler has a great company out there that helps thought leaders build their book. It's called Publishing School. So when he was relaunching it, he said, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to relaunch my book through podcast interviews. And, he had his connections there, but he knew he wanted to tap in to other people's connections through podcast interviews and also have a system so that it was very, very reproducible. A hardworking guy, but there's only so much that one person can do. So it was a great way for him to get his message out there, and all he had to do was show up. He's the guest. We took care of the rest. So now let's get to the own phase, right? How many times have you heard something or come up with something and you start talking about it, and then all of a sudden other people do, and it seems like they steal it from out from underneath you. And sometimes that could be because you didn't launch well enough, right? And they launched faster and better than you did. Other times it's just because you didn't stick with it long enough, right? And there's a time to plant, a time to harvest, and then there's a time to realize the harvest over and start planting again. But this own phase is so important out there. And we talk with our clients about different ways to do this. So David Rendell wrote a great book called The Freak Factor. He also wrote a great book called The Freak Factor for Kids, on how being different is what makes you wonderful. So he did his initial research, went out there in the seed phase. Then he launched his book. What great, right? But he wasn't making the money off of just the book, right? If you're an author, you know that very, very few authors hit it rich just on the book. He wanted to go out there and speaking. So he was going out on podcasts, strategic, targeted ones, to land more speaking gigs. And he was flying around the world based on different invitations that he got from podcast interviews. Another one, Gary Chan. I love Gary's story here. Gary's on the left. He's on the Industrial Talk podcast. And I learned so much from our clients. I remember talking with Gary, and he's a cybersecurity analyst, a consultant. And I said, so you're trying to get more leads and more clients with this? And he's like, no, I've got plenty of leads. I've got plenty of clients. I'm like, then why do you want to get out on podcast interviews? And he said, because I want to own the market, right? I don't want to have people forget about me. And he's like, when people search me, the more they find out about me, the higher my value is. So he wanted to make sure that the next client that he brought on was brought in at a higher level, right? So he wasn't just trying to do more. He was trying to do better, better, and better. And at the end of the day, we're not optimizing for the number of podcast interviews. We're not optimizing for the number of leads. I would even say we're not optimizing for the number of customers. That's not the ultimate goal. Most businesses are optimizing for profits, right? So you want the right people who value what you do, that will pay you for it also. So I thought Gary did a great job at optimizing for that. Other one, Marianne Pruitt. Marianne is awesome. She's got a great agency, but she lives in Alaska, right? How do you find strategic partners when you live in Alaska? It can be tough. So much of her business was coming through other agencies that she didn't want to just go out there and let somebody else take that. She went out there and started to own the market and find strategic partners, right? So instead of picking up clients one at a time, she was working with agencies to get more and more of those. Or another way, a great one to own it is your podcast. Start your own podcast, right? And often people will say, should I be a podcast guest or a podcast host? I don't think it's an either or, right? It's like, should I be an Uber driver or an Uber passenger? Well, really depends what your goals are. If you want to nurture your current leads, if you want to nurture your current clients, then be a podcast host. But if you want to go out and get new exposure, get new clients, then you've got to leverage somebody else's audience. And that's what Christopher Lochhead did. He came to us very early on. Christopher's one of the fathers of category design. And in fact, I give him credit for when we talk about podcast interview marketing, not just podcast guesting, that was Christopher's words with that. And so he got out there and he talked about his book, Play Bigger, which is right up there. And then he wanted to start his own podcast. Well, the best place to find podcast listeners, is listening to podcasts. So he went out and started to talk about his new show, Follow Your Different, and his show Blockhead on Marketing. And really, he's been able to build those up into top podcasts right there. This is one that I always put in here too. Plutonium is forever, but we're not plutonium, right? There is a decay of exposure, right? And the more content you have, the higher the level is there, probably the better chance you're going to have of staying up there. And let me give you an example of this. There was a lot of people that just sort of went radio silent over the last few years. They had a big presence there, and then, life happened, right? We all went through a lot over the last few years. Well, I was at a live event and somebody mentioned this person's name and they thought they had died. And I was like, no, he's still alive. And they're like, really? I hadn't seen him or heard of him, anything new. I just thought he died, right? And so there's this natural decay of, what have you done for me lately? I haven't seen you lately. Out of sight, out of mind. So I think it's important to get the content out there. And that could be repurposing it, right? Just because I was on an interview a year ago doesn't mean I can't promote it again, repurpose it again. You always want to keep it top of mind there. And I think sometimes people will seed the launch and then they'll just stop. They won't even start with anything new. And it's all of a sudden it seems like, wow, they were sort of, was that before COVID or Y2K? So you want to make sure that you're timely, you're timeless, you're relevant. And really, it's that whole cycle that wash, rinse, and repeat, right? You have a new idea, you seed it, then you launch it, then you own it. And about the time everybody else is copying it, that's when you come down with your next one: seed, launch, own. And it's the cycle that I've seen people do over and over. And you can see it's just not in podcasting. You can think of any of the greats out there, Brendan Bouchard, Tony Robbins, top consultants, right? They weren't just talking about the book they had last 10 years ago. They were always working on their next one, right? Listen to Seth Godin. If you want to know what his next book is about, listen to what he's talking about on podcasts now, because he's probably seeding the ideas for that. So I'm going to invite Tiffany back here. And I'm going to pass it over because in the room, I'm so excited. There are two great people in there. Juliana can tell her story, and I love focusing different people on the team. Hannah Garcia is her client account manager. And you hear me say this often. My microphone makes me sound good. My team makes me look good. And so I'm so excited to have Hannah here along with Juliana to really share their story, and because I've got opinions on it, but Juliana has recently gone through it. So I'll excuse myself, and I was gonna say, Tiffany, do you want to take it from here, or should I pass it straight over?
Sure, I'll take it from here, Tom.
All right.
Kick you out of the room. All right, and I'm going to bring on Hannah. As Tom said, she is one of our client account managers here, and she is the client account manager that works with Juliana on our team, and they work closely together. So thanks for joining us today, Hannah.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Tom and Tiffany, for the introduction.
Perfect. Well, if you're ready, we're going to bring Juliana on and let you guys talk kind of about the process. Hi, Juliana.
Hi, how are you?
Good, great. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear what you guys have to kind of discuss as far as your experience with podcast guesting and growing your consulting business. Juliana and I had the privilege of talking a couple weeks ago, and she had so many great things and insights to share on how she's incorporated podcast guesting to grow her business. And I'll let you guys take it from here. I'll pop out and I'll rejoin you in a few minutes.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Okay.
So, hi, Juliana. It's good to see you again. Obviously, we've talked before.
Hey, Hannah.
So, I, of course, have had the privilege of getting to know you and what you do with your company, Scale Time, through my time working with you. But for anyone else who might be listening who's kind of new to you and to the kind of work that you do, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am founder and CEO of a company called Scale Time, and we've now helped over 500 agencies in 5 continents scale their agencies. Pretty awesome stuff that we've been doing. Really helping owners kind of break through that 1.3, 3, and 7 million plateau. We're doing it with operations consulting, systems and processes, so owners can really find, that freedom of choice and have high performance teams at the same time.
That's awesome. So, with your interest in high performance, then so what kind of led you to deciding to up your performance with podcast interviewing? Whether it was before you got started with us, or did you make the decision to enter into that when you started with Interview Valet?
Yes. So a few years ago, I started interviewing on podcasts, and I would say like a trickle here and there. I have some great colleagues that have started podcasts, some that have done it very successfully, and I felt a little bit like, oh man, podcasting, at least in my inner circles, was like what blogging was, I don't know, like a decade and a half ago. I'm like, I'm late to the game. So but not, it wasn't, we didn't have a good system. It wasn't something that was like really repeatable, effective, or anything, right? Like, so a client of mine actually recommended you guys, and he's like, Juliana, you are really great with long form content, and he's like, more people just need to be able to listen to you and spend more time with you, so you can create that awareness, right? And he was like, and I had been hit up on LinkedIn in my inbox from people, different quote unquote like podcast brokers, or I guess that's the best term. And I was like, man, I don't know, maybe. I had been on a few platforms, but he is very picky. He's very picky. He's got great taste, and he's one of the best marketers in like Texas and Austin, Texas. And I really trusted his opinion, and that's why I got in it more regularly, I would say. And and now we've been with you guys for a little bit, almost a year. So I think it's just been a great fit for my audience.
That's awesome, and you are great with long form content. My calls with you are always fun. We have monthly calls with our clients, and I always look forward to talking with Juliana. It was a good recommendation to get you into speaking.
Well, I appreciate it.
Of course. So, how has then engaging with these podcasts and kind of getting into, like you said, like the blogging of a couple decades ago, how has that helped your business to thrive? Just all around, not necessarily only leads, but in thought leadership, reach, all of that great stuff.
Well, one of the things with podcasting that I think you taught me to do really well was just truly treat it like a funnel, right? Because before I was like, okay, I would guest on something, and then, whether or not people listen to me, it felt a little bit like PR, in the sense where, and some PR is excellent, don't get me wrong, but a lot of PR out there, it's like, you're like, I got this quote here, or I got to be there, and like it leads nowhere, right? Like, I mean, cool that you got somewhere, but I'm like, how do you know who's listening to you? How do you know who saw you? Like, what are your conversions? Where do you, where do those leads come through? And I was really looking for a channel for lead generation, right? And I was really specific on my wants and needs, and it was the first time where I was like, oh, okay, we can create like a legit channel where we can measure the conversions, see where things are going, be able to have attribution. And it was phenomenal because I hadn't seen this in podcasting before. And I knew that it was possible. I knew people were doing it. I was just like, how do you do it? And I think that was really great in terms of like how you laid it out, and really having a system to be able to create a channel for lead generation and then also be able to track it.
I'm sure I'm going to misquote him, but Tom likes to say something along the lines of, we like to work with podcast guesting, not podcast guessing. So I'm glad that if anyone can create a process for that, it definitely should be us. So I know that you definitely leaned into that kind of process that we encourage, whether it came to welcome page setup or sort of post-interview host connection and outreach. I know you ended up speaking at a couple of events for hosts after interviews. So what part of the sort of the guest to-do list on your side did you find to be the most helpful in your campaign's success?
I would absolutely say the welcome pages. And I think that in terms of figuring out, like, you know, who's coming to you from, you know, beyond just being on a sales call and being like, hey, where did you hear from us? And then they're like, oh, I heard from you from blah, blah, blah. And half the time they don't even remember, or they misquoted, or they've like, so you're like,
forget the website.
Yeah, the website. I was like, I don't know, I heard you on a podcast, or, you know, I was like driving and your voice was in my ear for 45 minutes. So I figured, I was like, okay, great. So I think the welcome pages really created an opportunity to track the traffic from each podcast. So we're like, oh, okay. And then from there, you know, we have our different calls to actions, which are like small, medium, and large, depending on what people want to do. And then we can see whether or not like certain podcasts are really like awesome, some ones are not, like what kind of audience is coming from a particular podcast. And I think that was really great. It also gave me an opportunity to have more discussions with the hosts, and also say like, hey, is there anything that you want me to promote? Is there, you know, any, you know, like, is there any way that I can offer help to your audience? And is there any way that maybe you can offer help to my community, right? So it also gave a bit more leverage in building that bond and relationship with the hosts.
Yeah, kind of opening those doors for connection even after the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Super cool. So I know that you had mentioned to me at one point that you had, I think it was 26,000 net gross revenue from the podcast calls. So were you able to attribute that through? Did you attribute that through referrals that you received? Was that something that the welcome pages helped you with? How was that? How did you track that was something that came from as a result of your podcast guesting?
So we were able to track it from the welcome pages, and it was one particular podcast that really read like at that point when I sent you guys that information, and so I was able to see like, oh, people had listened to it, they had gone to the welcome page, and then they had either like, you know, done one of our diagnostics, which is one of our calls to action, or they booked a call, right? Which eventually it led to a call. And so from this one particular podcast, it was really phenomenal because I was like, oh, okay, wow, like they really have my audience. Like, and, you know, and I was able to like really hit the pain points, and the messaging was just such a great fit. And from there, like I'm actually doing a workshop to their audience in May and doing some breakout speaking. So it just ended up being a really great fit, not only for that particular like podcast guesting, but also, you know, building a strategic partnership with the host, and, you know, kind of like uniting our community. So it had its like direct benefit, and then so much more of a ripple effect from that one guesting.
I think you did a great job kind of contributing to that ripple effect, and like you said, the narrowing of what was a good fit for you, because you were super proactive about your one sheet. I remember like every time that I asked, you know, maybe we could improve the one sheet, or is there something you're looking at, maybe featuring more recent guesting appearances on your sheet, you were always super proactive about updating that and pinpointing exactly who you wanted to speak to. And it was, gosh, I'm going to quote Tom again, we should just bring him back. But he always says better is better as opposed to bigger is better. So it was really nice to see you help us to narrow that pool into better fits and kind of an audience that was really excited to hear what you had to offer them.
Absolutely. And I think you guys were really great in making sure, because I know that when you're doing any sort of speaking or thought leadership, right, it's almost like a little bit of a ladder. You're like, you start somewhere and then you're like, okay, like bigger, guesting, bigger engagements, bigger speaking, like whatever it is. And then you kind of, right, you're like climbing your way up. And right. And so I think one of the partnerships with you guys, what you've done just really well is that, like, as I've been able to kind of climb that ladder, it's just been better podcasts, better messaging, and just really helping me to get better at this medium.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of a learning curve sometimes when people start out, but as you really get into the flow of it, it kind of has, like you said earlier, like a ripple effect, and you can really build upon the process as it goes along. So I'm so glad you've been able to do that. I think that going forward, you're going to have a lot more opportunities, and that you've been so proactive in pursuing host connection and doing those engagements afterwards. So I've been really pleased to work with you, and I hope that you keep having the results that you've been enjoying so far.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. I've loved working with you and the team. So just glad to be able to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, guys. I'm going to pop back in on your little conversation there. Juliana, you said so many great things. I was over here taking notes myself. I love that you talk about, like, as Christopher Lochhead, his book is called, or his book is Niche Down, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of start out with this wide net of who you think your audience is, or here's my existing clients, here's who I want to talk to. And it's in this ever evolving process. And that's what's so powerful about it, is that that you're able to, it's always kind of evolving and growing with you. And, we have times when clients are promoting their book, right? And they want to go kind of this direction. And then, okay, I'm promoting, I'm working on a product launch, and they'll kind of go this direction. And you can kind of gauge it toward your goals. I know when you and I talked, you have upcoming plans, and you're kind of navigating, and changing your course as well. We saw that with a client that Tom talked about earlier, Craig Cody. Through his process of podcast guesting, he discovered that dentists really resonated with his message. And that's not even a demographic that he really took note of until going on some podcasts. And it benefited him greatly in a lot of ways. And just that creation of long form content, and then you have, right, 45 minutes of a conversation, the amount of content that you can pull out of that and extract and repurpose for, now until forever if you want to, because it creates evergreen content that's forever on the internet, and it can be forever on your website, always snippets and audiograms to share on your social media. So lots of great stuff. I think we're going to go ahead and bring Tom back on, and he can join in our conversation here. Hi, Tom.
Hello. And I get to actually see Juliana in real life, meet her next month in May at that conference you were talking about, that you were on the podcast, got invited to be a presenter there. And all of a sudden I was looking at the conference. I'm like, oh, that's in Chicago. I get to meet her in real life.
I know, like, we get to meet in 3D. This is so exciting.
That's right. Hey, and Hannah said something, and I wanted to thank you for this, and also acknowledge it, right? After 9 years, I know podcast interview marketing works, right? But I also know podcast interview marketing-ish doesn't work, right? There's more to it than just, I got up and I had a nice discussion. Hannah mentioned you were proactive in updating the one sheet, learning from it, testing different calls to action. And most people are going, calls to action, what's that? Or other people are like, I thought you just did one call to action. So all of those things that are important to actually turn people from being a passive listener into an active visitor and engaged lead. So kudos to you for working the process.
Well, I mean, thank you, Tom, for providing a process to test, because I think that's a huge deal.
And it's come over 9 years of testing, right? I just repeat things that I have heard and learned, right? Isn't that what we all do? We've all got opinions, but our customers are the experts, and they're teaching us. So as we're learning stuff, like here's one for you. I'm just going to do a video on this. Okay, here's a little tip for everybody. Think of your video right now. If you cut off the left third and the right third, that's what you're left for in a reel, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I never knew that. So like now when we do podcast interviews, I'm going to start telling everybody, don't be like me and have your head up like this, because when you cut it for a reel, it's going to look really funny. Yeah. So it's all about optimizing there. So I was going to say, Tiffany, did you have any questions? I see some have come in here and.
Yeah, absolutely. And Juliana actually kind of touched on some of the questions that we had. One of them was, how to repurpose and promote your interviews and really get that maximum value. I know you talked about the welcome pages. We have found through our trial and error and exploration that that's actually the number one way to track your ROI in terms of podcast interviews. It's an unindexed website or page on your website that people will only know about and go to from listening to that interview, that specific one, especially if you do customized welcome pages for each interview. And so you can definitively see they only got there because of that interview. And then from there, you can see, oh, they clicked on this call to action, or they booked a call with me, or they emailed me, or so that we found is the number one way to track. Do you guys have any wisdom to share as far as promoting and repurposing?
I would just say there's a guide that Tiffany put together, right? Mm-hmm. And once again, we see so many different clients doing different things that we share all that together. I would say one observation that I've heard lately, and we're really big into AI and ChatGPT. We're trying to figure out creative ways to use it. One of the things that I'm concerned about is, will content, like printed content, become so generic now that it'll become meaningless, right? So will the blog, people wonder, wow, did Tom write that, or did ChatGPT write it? Will it get so watered down that people will wonder if it's real? Whereas I don't think, if you take a video snippet, it's like, yep, that's Tom. Nobody else can talk in circles like him. Or an audio clip. It's like, yeah, no AI would use that many filler words. I think that authenticity is going to come through even more. So as I'm seeing more and more repurposing, to repurpose the video, the audio, and even starting with that in mind, right? Of trying to think, how would this video look if I cut it up? I don't cut it up, right? I don't know how to do it. But if I had somebody on my team cut it up and repurpose it, because if I talk for 45 minutes in an interview, the team can find like 30 seconds of brilliance in there, and they'll cut that part out, and that's what they'll promote.
Exactly. Maybe a little more than 30 seconds.
Well, if you put it together. And Tiffany, thanks for putting in the case study for Juliana in the in there, if anybody wants to check that out. Juliana, the question I wanted to ask is, if there was somebody that was thinking, that was like in your position when you started, right? Either, I don't know if this will work, if they've got concerns about it, what would you say to them on that, right? Think of where you were a year ago on this? And what would you say to that person?
I would say that if they've done any marketing in the past, right, and they've tracked their ROI, like this is one of the biggest ROIs that you can do for your marketing, especially with consultants, right? Like if you're throwing money at Facebook ads, and that gets really expensive really quickly, right? Like any sort of PPC. If you're doing AdWords, you don't know who you're gonna get into your sales funnel and your sales pipeline, right? Like it might be your keywords, even if you're getting real smart with it. Like it's hard to like really narrow an audience with Google AdWords. If you're doing SEO, you know that takes anywhere between 6 to 18 months, right? So for you to be able to see ROI, that's gonna take a while. So just as we're thinking of what kind of marketing channels work and work quickly, and effectively, efficiently, in a cost-effective manner where people are gonna, especially in this economic climate, like know, like, and trust you. I think that this particular marketing channel is just one of the best.
That's interesting that you say works quickly, because that's one of the things that I talk with people, and there's like, the best podcasts are like doctors' offices and restaurants, right? If there's not a waiting list, there's a reason you don't want to be there. So I tell them, we'll get all the onboarding done in the first week, and then we reach out, and 7 to 10 days, we'll get an invitation. But the mean time between invitation and recording is 30 days. And from recording to going live is 42. And they're like, well, I want to get heard tomorrow.
Yeah, but and so how much is it between onboarding and then going live? What is that? Like maybe 50 days?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, with all of that, it should be, within 2 months, your first interview should be going live there.
Yeah. So 2 months, right? I mean, anything else that you're doing, you're validating, right? So like if you're doing Facebook ads and anyone who's like, oh yeah, we'll get you clients tomorrow. I mean, unless they've like nailed it, and you've got all of your materials and all of your creative and everything, right? It's usually gonna take about 2 to 3 months to validate that it's working, right? While the algorithm learns and while you get your creative and while you onboard and right? So even like ads take about 2 to 3 months to really start clicking. SEO takes forever. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's one of the most cost-effective things, but it's going to take you 6 months. So I think 2 months to get a working, validated channel is incredibly fast.
Yeah. It's interesting because, it's sometimes the metrics, like with paid ads, right? You can get the report at the end of the week. Wow, this was seen by, 10,000 people. Didn't mean they were the right people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, where do you think I'm struggling with SEO right now? Because, one of the things that I tell people that podcast interviews are great for SEO because you get the backlink from every podcast, a naturally earned backlink. But I'm concerned that SEO may disappear really quickly, right? Because if right now I go to a search engine, I ask Google a question, and it gives me the top 10 websites to go to get that. And I'm like, how quick is it going to be where Bing or whoever just gives me the answer? And if I don't have to go to that website, and so that's, while we always optimize for SEO, I'm like, I don't know that I want to bet my business that that's the only channel I'm getting stuff from. What's your thoughts on that?
I think so. We have a lot of clients that do SEO. We're currently doing SEO as well, right? And with your note on AI earlier, right? Like right now there's AI detectors. And so what's happening is like, yes, like we can use ChatGPT and there's great ways to kind of wiggle around the detectors and plagiarism and, and all that stuff. I still think that great content will stand out. And even if, let's say you're using ChatGPT, to instead of a search engine, right, to give you answers, it's not going to give you anything within the last 2 years, right, because it hasn't learned it.
Currently,
So
yeah.
that's one, right? So like if you want anything current, it, you know, it can't. Google's coming out with theirs, which should have, I mean, I'm very excited about that. Let's see what happens. But you still, if you want more information, because people tend to consume information in bunches, right? Especially when they're looking for an answer. So whether they're binging, you know, a podcast or YouTube videos, or, you know, they get into a blog and they're like, okay, well, this is interesting, but then what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Because when people are actually trying to learn something, they're either doing it situationally, like, oh, I'm in the car, this is what I'm going to listen to my favorite podcast, right? Or I'm having lunch, or I'm cooking, so I'm going to listen to something in the background, right? So I think people are either doing this situationally, or they're doing it in search of something specific. And when they're doing it in search of something specific, they're going to want more. So I still think that great content depends on the medium, right? Like whether it's audio, visual, you know, video, what that can be, is still going to stand out. Like, I think that the bots are super intelligent, but everyone's like, oh my God, ChatGPT, it's like, you know, it like, you know, can pass the MCATs, and it can pass, you know, like the LSATs and all this. And I'm like, yeah, but even if, right, like, let's pretend we say, okay, you're phenomenally intelligent. Like, do you want a first year, you know, med graduate intern operating on you at the surgical table, right? Or are you going to send that like first year attorney that just passed the LSATs like into the courtroom for your biggest client? Probably not, right? Like, I mean, it's still junior. Like, it still needs to be managed. So that's my thoughts on AI. Like, yes, it's very sophisticated, but it's not sophisticated enough.
Yeah, that's a great take on it. And yeah, I'm thinking he's got ChatGPT's got less experience than Doogie Howser.
Yeah.
Right? Now I'm showing my age. People now are Googling Doogie Howser. But you also
Neil
said
Patrick Harris is great.
Yeah. Binging. I never thought about that too, that when we look for an answer, we binge. Because I've had it before, like trying to attribute when you talk to somebody and say, well, you know, what podcast did you hear me on? And like, I don't know, I don't remember the first one, but then I searched you and listened to 3 or 4 different ones. And you're like, oh, they know more about me than I know about them. And the sales call becomes funny because it's not a sales call. They're already pre-qualified. It's more, they're sold. It's more of a qualification call.
Absolutely. And it's really fascinating. You know, when, I mean, being on the other end of that, right? But when I know, like, when I'm researching something and then all of a sudden I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I've gone down this Instagram rabbit hole of this rando person I don't know, but I found them rather fascinating. And now I've learned about all of the Korean sunscreens that I do not need. Like, I'm just like, so like, okay, I'm definitely, and I think we're just wired that way, right? And the algorithms and the platforms in which we are searching, you know, count on it. They count on our behavior.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, to kind of tie it all together, if they're learning about you, right? And we going back to the PPC, the pay-per-clicks. You don't know, like you said, who you're going to get, who's going to click. That doesn't mean they're a qualified lead. But if someone listens to you for 30, 45 minutes on a podcast, I mean, they have already jumped through all of those, whatever we're up to, 12, 18 touch points it now takes to make a sale, right? So the time they get to you and land on your website or your welcome page, they have pretty much already decided they want to interact with you further, right? And like take those next steps. And we see a lot of times for coaches and consultants, it results in quicker to close. You know, it's like their discovery call or their consultation call results in a sale right then and there, because that person has they've done the research, they've binged you already. Like you said, they show up knowing more about you than you know about you, and they've already decided, right? And it's just it's a kind of cuts out all the middle steps. It's efficient.
It absolutely is. I remember I once got on a call with somebody, and I thought it was so funny because, like, I'm a data nerd, right? So like I go into my emails, and I'm like, all right, who's top like clickers, who's top like who's interacting, who's doing what, blah blah blah. And I had reached out to them like individually a few times, as I often do, because I just like to know my audience, my customer base. I'm like, hey, do you have any issues? I see that you've been clicking on a bunch of things, or blah blah blah, right? Like, you're lurking me, I'm lurking to you back, right? So anyway, and she finally got on a call. I think it was like a year later, and I was like, oh, hi, here you are, right? Like, I'm like, because I had seen that she had popped up. And she's like, yeah. She's like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ghost you. I wasn't trying to like not respond or be rude. I just knew that the moment I got on a call with you, I was done. I was like, I was like, okay, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But she's like, I'm ready. How do I sign up? And that's, Tiffany, to your point, like that's where they really know, like, and trust you. And you get to cut out so much of the sales process because your marketing has done it for you.
Right. Exactly.
I think we've got a new hashtag. Hashtag I binged you.
I like that. Yeah. That is so true. I think that's a great point. We've like wrapped it up. We brought it full circle, and I see we're up on our time here. So much great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, Juliana. I put your case study over there, so if people want to learn more about you, they can.
Awesome.
We appreciate your time today and your firsthand insights on how this has worked for you in growing your consulting business. Thank you, Hannah, for joining us. We're excited to have another IV team member with us here. And yeah, I think that's it. Anybody have anything else before we wrap here?
No.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, we will sign off with that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Those listening to the recording, thank you as well. If you did register today, we'll be sending you over a copy of the recording, so you have that. And that's it. And as we kind of teased in the beginning, next month in May, we'll be kind of addressing how brands specifically can grow with podcast guesting. And then June, we will roll into nonfiction authors. So if that fits you or someone you know, please pass on the word, and we will see you next time. Thank you.